4 urgent signs. Your divine spouse is dangerously close. Something led a person to this message. And it wasn't an accident. There are no throwaway moments when it comes to matters this close to the heart. And the fact that these words are being read right now, at this particular point in someone's story, is worth pausing to consider. Most people would call it coincidence. But, well, I don't believe in random coincidences. There's a growing number of men and women who've stopped believing in coincidences entirely, especially when it comes to love, faith, and the kind of marriage that actually lasts. Here's the counterintuitive truth that almost nobody talks about. The closer a person gets to their divine spouse, the more intense the inner pressure tends to feel. And most people misread every single one of those signals, almost walking right past the most significant moment of their relational lives. What if the very longing that's been sitting quietly in the chest for months, maybe years, wasn't a sign of lack, but a sign of something approaching? What if everything that's felt like waiting has actually been preparation in disguise? The spirituality woven into the search for a true, lasting marriage is something the world doesn't talk about honestly, but God has been speaking about it clearly and consistently to anyone willing to slow down long enough to listen. This isn't a message for everyone. And that's not arrogance, that's discernment. This is for the person who still believes, somewhere beneath the disappointment and the detours, that God has someone specific for them, someone chosen, someone worth the wait, and who's opened their Bible in the quiet of the night, asking, with raw honesty, whether the dream of a real marriage is still alive. Because what's about to be shared isn't just encouraging, it's urgent. These 4 signs are already showing up in the lives of people who are on the very edge of their breakthrough. And recognizing them could mean the difference between stepping forward in faith and accidentally stepping back in fear. Don't look away. Don't skip ahead. What comes next might be the answer that's been prayed for longer than anyone would care to admit. There's something stirring deep inside a person that no amount of distraction can silence, and most people don't even know what to call it. It's not loneliness exactly, though it feels like a cousin to it. It's more like a quiet ache that shows up in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, when everything seems fine on the surface, but something underneath keeps whispering that there's more. That restlessness isn't a flaw. It's not a sign that something is broken or that a person has somehow failed at life. In fact, when someone begins to understand their own spirituality on a deeper level, they start to realize that this kind of inner longing is actually intentional. It's woven into the fabric of who they are, placed there by design. The Bible speaks to this truth in ways that are surprisingly personal. It describes a God who sees the inner life of every human being with incredible detail. And that means the longing a person feels in their chest isn't random noise. It's a signal. It's a compass pointing somewhere real, and it's pointing towards someone real. What's fascinating is that this restlessness tends to intensify right before something significant is about to shift. A lot of people misread that intensity as a reason to panic, to settle, or to give up entirely on the idea that a true, lasting marriage is even possible for them. But that's actually getting it backwards. When the ache gets louder, it often means the answer is getting closer, not further away. Think about how a radio signal gets stronger the closer you move toward the broadcast tower. The noise doesn't mean the station is gone. It means something is being received more clearly than before. There's a deep spiritual truth hiding in that image. God doesn't plant longing in a person's heart without also planting a purpose behind it. The person who's been praying quietly for years, wondering if they've somehow been overlooked or forgotten, they haven't been, not even close. The longing they carry is actually evidence of a promise that hasn't expired. Here's where it gets really interesting and, honestly, a little uncomfortable for some people to sit with. The restlessness isn't just about wanting a partner, it's also about becoming. The waiting period that so many people dread is actually one of the most spiritually active seasons a person can walk through. It's during this time that character is being shaped, healed, and prepared for something that genuinely requires depth to hold. A person who's been chosen for a meaningful, God-honoring marriage isn't just handed it like a prize, they're grown into it. And that growing process involves learning to read the signs, trusting the timing, and paying close attention to what's happening internally before it manifests externally. The restlessness, then, isn't something to run from. It's something to lean into, to get curious about, and, for those who take their faith seriously, to pray through. Because what feels like waiting is often actually preparing. And preparation, in God's economy, is never wasted time. There's a moment most people have experienced but rarely stop to examine, when something unexpected breaks into the normal flow of a day and leaves a person wondering, how did that just happen? Maybe it's running into someone at the most unlikely place, or hearing a song that perfectly mirrors what's been sitting heavy on the heart, or stumbling across a Bible verse at the exact moment it was needed most. Most people shrug these moments off, label them as coincidences, and keep moving. But there's a thread of spirituality running through those interruptions that deserves a much closer look. God has a long history of showing up in the ordinary, in burning bushes, in still small voices, in conversations that seemed accidental, but turned out to be anything but. The person who's been chosen for something significant in the area of love and marriage would do well to start paying attention to these interruptions with fresh eyes. Because what looks random on the surface often has a very deliberate hand behind it. What makes these divine interruptions so easy to miss is that they almost never look dramatic. There's no thunder, no flash of light, no unmistakable booming voice from the sky. Instead, they tend to show up quietly, in a door that closes at just the right time, in a relationship that ends and finally creates space for something real to enter, in a friend who mentions something out of nowhere that lands like a direct answer to a prayer. The Bible is filled with stories of people who almost walked right past their breakthrough because it didn't arrive in the package they were expecting. And that's still happening today in the lives of real people who are genuinely seeking a lasting, faith-centered marriage. The interruptions are there. The question is whether a person has trained themselves to recognize the fingerprints of God on the moments that seem, on the surface, like nothing more than luck or timing. Here's something worth sitting with. Divine interruptions often come in clusters. One unusual moment might be easy to dismiss, but when a person starts noticing a pattern, when the so-called coincidences begin stacking up in the same direction, that's when it's time to pay very close attention. It's like God is turning up the volume on a message that's been playing softly in the background all along. For the person who's been quietly praying, quietly hoping, quietly holding on to the belief that a chosen partner is still out there, those clusters of interruption are often the earliest signs that something is moving in the unseen. They're not accidents, they're announcements. And the person who learns to treat them that way, who responds with faith instead of skepticism, tends to find themselves standing at the edge of something they once only dared to dream about. There's a particular kind of work that happens in a person's life that doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It just quietly begins, often in the aftermath of pain. A relationship that didn't work out, a season of loneliness that stretched longer than expected, a wound from the past that finally cracked open enough to let some light in. Most people experience this kind of emotional healing and think of it as something separate from their love life. Like it's just personal growth happening off to the side while they wait for the real thing to arrive. But that thinking misses something profound. The spirituality embedded in the healing process is directly connected to the quality of the marriage that's coming. God doesn't send a person their most sacred relationship while they're still carrying the weight of unresolved hurt. He tends to do the deep work first, the kind of work that can't be rushed, can't be funked, and can't be skipped. And for the person who's been chosen for something lasting and real, that healing season is less of a detour and more of a direct route. What's striking about this kind of preparation is how personal it is. It's not generic self-improvement, it's targeted. The specific fears that get addressed, the specific patterns that get broken, the specific lies a person believed about their own worth that finally start losing their grip. None of that is accidental. The Bible makes it clear that God knows a person fully, inside and out, before they even form a single word. That means the healing being experienced right now isn't random therapy. It's custom work. It's the kind of interior renovation that makes room for another person to actually enter and stay, not just visit. So many marriages struggle not because the two people were wrong for each other, but because one or both of them brought in wounds that were never dealt with, patterns that were never broken, walls that were never torn down. The person walking through genuine healing right now is being spared that future pain. They're being set up, quietly and carefully, for something that actually has a foundation strong enough to last. Here's the part that tends to catch people off guard. The healing itself is one of the clearest signs that a divine spouse is near. Not far. Near. Because God doesn't typically do extensive preparation work for something that's decades away. When a person notices that old wounds are losing their sting, that forgiveness is coming more easily, that they're starting to genuinely like who they're becoming, that's not just personal progress. That's spiritual readiness being built in real time. The person who recognizes this season for what it truly is stops resenting the process and starts cooperating with it. They lean into the uncomfortable conversations with themselves. They do the work with gratitude instead of frustration. And somewhere in that shift, from resistance to surrender, something opens up. A readiness settles in. And readiness, in God's timing, has a tendency to be met very quickly with exactly what it prepared for. There's a kind of peace that doesn't make sense by human logic. And that's exactly what makes it so significant. It's not the peace that comes from having all the answers, or from finally figuring out the timeline, or from getting some kind of external confirmation that everything is going to be okay. It's quieter than that. It settles in without permission, often in the middle of circumstances that haven't changed at all on the outside. A person can still be single, still be waiting, still have zero visible evidence that their season is shifting, and yet something deep inside them just settles. That's not denial. That's not giving up. That's actually one of the most powerful spiritual indicators that something significant is about to move. The Bible describes this kind of peace in Philippians as something that surpasses all understanding, meaning it can't be fully explained by logic, only experienced by faith. And for the person who's been chosen for a God-designed marriage, this peace often arrives like a quiet herald, showing up just ahead of the answer they've been waiting for. What makes this peace so easy to dismiss is that it arrives without drama. There's no external event that triggers it, no obvious reason for it to show up when it does. One day, a person is carrying the familiar weight of wondering and waiting, and then, almost without noticing, that weight begins to lift. The prayers start feeling less desperate and more like genuine conversation. The longing is still there, but it's lost its sharp edge. There's a new ability to be present, to enjoy life, to stop white-knuckling the future and simply trust the one who holds it. That shift in the spiritual atmosphere of a person's inner life is not small. It's actually enormous. It means that the soul has moved from striving into receiving. And receiving is the posture that tends to attract everything God has already prepared. The person who reaches this place isn't passive. They're actually more aligned, more ready, and more open than they've ever been. And that alignment has a way of drawing things in fast. Here's the thing about this piece that most people don't fully appreciate until they look back on it. It almost always shows up just before the story turns. Not months before, not years before, just before. The person who learns to recognize it, to honor it, and to lean into it rather than question it away is the person who tends to be standing in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, when their divine spouse finally steps into view. God's timing has never been early, and it's never been late. And the peace He gives in the final stretch of the waiting season is one of His most personal gifts. It's His way of saying, without words, that the chapter is turning, that the prayer has been heard, that the one who's been chosen, prepared, healed, and made ready is about to step into the marriage they once only allowed themselves to dream about in the quiet moments. That peace isn't the end of the journey. It's the last sign before the destination comes into sight.